Beneath the streets of America's biggest cities run tunnels that almost no one who walks above them has ever seen. Some were built for trains that never carried a single passenger. Some were built for freight, for coal, for secrecy, for survival. Most of them are still there today, sealed, flooded, or simply forgotten. Directly beneath sidewalks, millions of people cross every day without knowing what lies underneath. This video counts down 10 real tunnels under 10 American cities, from a 2-mile subway in Ohio that was finished a century ago and has never carried a single rider, to a guarded passage beneath the White House built for a president to escape a bombing raid. Every tunnel on this list is documented in city records, historical archives, or federal disclosures. None of them are open for the public to simply walk into. Stay with me to the end, because the final tunnel on this list is the only one in the country that is actively patrolled by armed federal agents 24 hours a day, every single day, and has been since the 1940s. Let's begin. In 1870, a man named Alfred Beach secretly built New York City's first subway tunnel beneath Broadway, working at night through a storefront so the city government would not find out what he was actually constructing. Beach had been granted a permit to build a small pneumatic mail tube. Instead, he built a fully functioning one-block passenger subway, complete with a single elegant car pushed through the tunnel by a giant fan, and a waiting room with a fountain, a grand piano, and goldfish swimming in a tank. The Beach Pneumatic Transit operated for less than a year before political opposition and a lack of funding shut it down for good. The entrance was sealed, the tunnel was abandoned, and within a few decades most New Yorkers had completely forgotten it had ever existed. The tunnel sat hidden and undisturbed for more than 4 decades, until construction crews building the city's new subway system broke through its wall in 1912, discovering Beach's original car and the remains of his ornate waiting room, still sitting exactly where he had left them. Today, the tunnel no longer exists as a separate structure, since it was absorbed into the modern subway system during later construction, but the section of Broadway above it still follows the exact path of America's first subway tunnel, a passage that operated in near-total secrecy and was then sealed and forgotten so completely that the city that built its replacement had no idea it was even there. Beneath the streets of downtown Cincinnati, 2 miles of finished subway tunnel have sat completely unused since the early 1920s, making it the largest abandoned subway system in the United States. Construction began in 1920, funded by a $6 million bond that voters approved by an overwhelming margin, with plans for a 16-mile loop connecting downtown to the surrounding neighborhoods using the bed of the city's old, polluted canal. The tunnel itself was finished. 4 underground stations were built, complete with platforms and tiled walls. But rising costs from inflation, then the Great Depression, then the outbreak of the Second World War, repeatedly delayed the project until the funding ran out entirely and the city simply gave up. No track was ever laid. No train ever entered the tunnel carrying a passenger. Central Parkway, one of the city's main downtown streets, was built directly on top of the unused tunnel in 1928 and has run above it ever since. The tunnels remain structurally sound today, still carrying a large water main and fiber-optic cables, but public access has been closed for years, with the city occasionally allowing a single, tightly controlled charity tour each year. Entrances visible from the street are sealed behind brick walls and steel gates, and beneath one of the busiest parkways in downtown Cincinnati, 4 fully built subway stations sit exactly as they were left almost a century ago, waiting for trains that were never built to come. Beneath the loop, the heart of downtown Chicago, runs 60 miles of narrow freight tunnels, originally built under false pretenses. In 1899, a company calling itself the Illinois Telephone and Telegraph Company received permission from the city to lay underground telephone cables. Instead, they secretly built tunnels large enough to run a small electric railroad designed to move coal, mail, and freight directly into the basements of the loop's largest buildings. When city officials discovered the deception in 1902, the company simply applied for a new charter and kept building. By the time the network was finished, it stretched 60 miles beneath the city, moving freight between department stores, office towers, and rail terminals for decades. The system became unprofitable by the late 1950s and was abandoned, its entrances bricked over by the buildings it once served, its existence slipping out of public memory within a generation. On April 13, 1992, the forgotten tunnels reminded the entire city they still existed. A construction crew repairing a bridge accidentally breached a tunnel wall beneath the Chicago River, and over the following hours, an estimated 250 million gallons of river water poured into the abandoned network, flooding basements across the loop and shutting down the city's financial district for days. The tunnels remain sealed and inaccessible to the public today, still carrying high-voltage cables and fiber-optic lines through a network most Chicagoans never knew existed until the day it nearly drowned their city. When New York City's first subway line opened in 1904, its southern terminus was a station beneath City Hall Park, designed to be the most beautiful stop in the entire system, with vaulted tile ceilings, ornamental skylights and brass chandeliers. The City Hall station was built specifically to impress, a showpiece intended to convince the public that an underground railway could be as elegant as anything built above ground. The station's design ultimately caused its downfall. Its platform was built on a tight curve too short to accommodate the longer trains the system later required, and on December 34, 1945, after just over 4 decades of service, the station was permanently closed. Its ornate skylights, which once let sunlight filter down from City Hall Park above, were paved over. Its street entrances were sealed and eventually removed entirely. Today, the station still exists exactly as it was, used only as a turning loop for downtown trains that pass through without stopping, visible only in a brief flash to anyone who happens to glance out the window. Public entry is granted only a handful of times per year, exclusively to New York Transit Museum members, who pass a mandatory background check before being allowed inside, making one of the most architecturally significant subway stations ever built in America, one of the hardest to actually set foot in. Roughly 1,200 feet beneath the streets of Detroit runs a network of more than 100 miles of underground roads, carved not for transportation, but for salt. Rock salt was discovered beneath the city in 1895, and after a first company went bankrupt trying to dig down to it, the Detroit Salt Company finally completed a shaft to the deposit in 1910, opening one of the largest salt mines in the country, directly beneath a major American city. The mine has operated, on and off, for more than a century, supplying salt for the leather and food industries in its early decades, and today almost exclusively for winter road de-icing across the region. Heavy mining equipment used underground must be completely disassembled at the surface and lowered piece by piece down the narrow shaft, then rebuilt more than 1,000 feet below ground, where the mine maintains its own internal road network, repair shops and fueling stations, an entire industrial city existing in total darkness beneath the streets of Detroit and its suburbs. Public tours of the mine were offered decades ago but ended due to safety regulations, and access today is restricted entirely to mine employees. Most residents of Detroit, Dearborn and Melvindale spend their entire lives walking, driving and building directly above more than 100 miles of tunnel they will never be permitted to see, a hidden industrial network older than the city's automobile industry and considerably larger than most people realize. Beneath the Massachusetts State House and the streets of downtown Boston runs the oldest subway tunnel in the United States, a system that predates every other underground railway in the country by years. Opened in 1897 to relieve catastrophic surface congestion from the city's streetcar network, the original Tremont Street subway included sections and inclines that were modified, bypassed, or fully abandoned as Boston's transit system expanded and changed over the following century. One of the most notable of these is the old Pleasant Street incline, a now sealed entrance ramp that once carried streetcars down into the tunnel from street level before newer connections made it unnecessary. As Boston's subway system grew more complex throughout the 20th century, several original tunnel segments and station platforms were closed off entirely, left intact but disconnected from active service, sealed behind walls in a system that has been continuously rebuilt on top of itself for well over a century. Today, transit workers and maintenance crews are among the only people who ever see these oldest sections of the system, tucked away behind the platforms used by hundreds of thousands of daily Boston commuters who have no idea that in certain spots they are standing just a few feet from tunnel segments that have not carried a passenger since long before their grandparents were born. In the early 20th century, Rochester, New York, looked at its filthy, disease-prone Erie Canal aqueduct running through the heart of downtown and decided to drain it and build a subway in its place. The Rochester subway opened in 1927, running primarily along the old canal bed, and for a brief period gave the city a modern underground transit option that few cities of its size in America could claim. The subway never achieved the ridership the city had hoped for, and as automobile ownership exploded across the country in the mid-20th century, the line was progressively scaled back. Passenger service ended entirely in 1956, just under 3 decades after it began, and large sections of the tunnel were later filled in or repurposed for highway construction as the city reorganized its downtown infrastructure around cars rather than rail. Portions of the abandoned tunnel still exist beneath downtown Rochester today, including stretches that briefly housed freight operations after passenger service ended, and sections that have sat completely sealed and empty for decades. Public access has never been formally available, and the tunnel remains one of the lesser-known abandoned subway systems in the country, a forgotten transit experiment buried beneath a city that ultimately decided it no longer wanted it. In the Westlake neighborhood of Los Angeles, a single sealed tunnel entrance set into a hillside is almost all that remains visible of what was once the western terminus of the Pacific Electric Railway's underground line, a tunnel that ran trolley cars beneath the streets toward downtown Los Angeles for decades in the early to mid-20th century. Known to generations of urban explorers as the Belmont Tunnel, the passage once connected to the so-called Hollywood subway, one of the only true subway tunnels Los Angeles built before the city committed itself almost entirely to automobiles and freeways. Passenger rail service through the tunnel ended in 1955 as the Pacific Electric system was progressively dismantled across Southern California in favor of buses and private cars, a transformation that erased one of the largest streetcar networks in the world within a generation. The tunnel sat abandoned for decades afterward, becoming a magnet for graffiti artists, urban explorers, and for a period filmmakers who used its industrial decay as a backdrop for movies and music videos. Today, the tunnel's entrance has been sealed and partially redeveloped as the surrounding area has been built over with modern apartments and transit infrastructure, leaving only fragments of the original passage accessible at all, and those only through restricted, unauthorized entry. What was once a functioning piece of one of the most extensive rail systems in American history now exists mostly as a sealed memory beneath a rapidly changing Los Angeles neighborhood. Underneath Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., a network of at least 19 separate tunnels and underground passages connects the Capitol building to its surrounding office buildings and the Library of Congress, including a small underground subway system reserved exclusively for members of Congress, their staff, and escorted guests. The earliest of these tunnels were built in 1909, not for security, but simply so senators and representatives could move between buildings without going outside in Washington's notoriously bad weather. Over the following century, the network expanded considerably, eventually including underground shops, a post office, mechanical workshops for the architect of the Capitol, and in 1958, a tunnel section that was specifically designated as a fallout shelter at the height of Cold War nuclear anxiety. The tunnels are not open to the general public under any circumstance, unless a visitor is directly accompanied by a member of Congress or their staff, a restriction that has remained firmly in place for decades. The network's true scale became visible to the public only briefly during the events of January 6, 2021, when members of Congress, congressional staff, and the Vice President were evacuated through these same underground passages as rioters breached the Capitol above them, a rare moment when the existence of a tunnel system most Americans had never heard of became suddenly a matter of national news. In December 1941, just days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, construction crews began secretly digging a tunnel beneath the streets of Washington, D.C., to connect the White House to the basement vaults of the Treasury building next door, giving the president a hardened escape route in the event of an aerial bombing raid on the Capitol. The Treasury building, with its deep granite foundation and reinforced vaults, was considered a far safer refuge than the White House itself, which at the time had only a shallow basement offering little real protection. The finished tunnel stretched 761 feet, deliberately built in a zigzag pattern rather than a straight line, specifically to reduce the concussive force of a potential bomb blast traveling through it. Small rooms along its length were once outfitted with cots, so the passage could double as a shelter, and 2 stories below the Treasury's main cash room, a 10-room emergency suite was built to house the president and his family if they ever needed to flee there directly. The tunnel remains in active use today, guarded around the clock by the Secret Service and secured with cameras, alarms, and cipher locks that have never been removed since they were first installed. It is the only tunnel on this list confirmed to be under constant 24-hour armed protection, a passage built in a moment of genuine wartime fear that has remained sealed to the public, sealed to history, and fully operational for more than 80 years, running directly beneath one of the most photographed streets in the country, completely unseen by anyone who walks above it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, let us know which of these 10 tunnels surprised you the most, and we'll see you in the next one.